Hello, I'm Tony DeMaria, the editor of JACC, here with another edition of Inside JACC to tell you about the March 13th issue and some really interesting articles that we have in that issue. And the first one deals with HIV. And we all know that patients with HIV are more susceptible to have hyperlipidemia, especially if they're on HAART, that is highly active retroviral therapy. And so the question that was asked in this particular paper that comes from Brazil was whether you could eliminate or offset those lipid abnormalities in HIV patients treated with HAARTs by a very strict diet. And the strict diet that they used here came from the National Cholesterol Education Program, low in saturated fat, low in trans fats, and very, very high in fiber. And in fact, as compared to a control group of patients, the HIV patients who stayed on this very strict NCEP diet actually had no change in their lipids whatsoever, while the control group had an increase in cholesterol, LDL, and triglycerides. And so it's increasingly apparent that atherosclerosis is becoming more prevalent in HIV patients as they live longer, may well be related to some of these lipid disorders, and so the ability to avoid them with diet should be very important. The second study I'd like to tell you about deals with patients with heart failure and particularly contrasts the prevalence of comorbidities in patients with heart failure due to associated with preserved ejection fraction as compared to patients with reduced ejection fraction. And so these data came from the VA system, a retrospective analysis of the VA system. And in examining these patients, what they found was that the incidence of comorbidities of all kinds of diseases, not only hypertension, but also diabetes and COPD, was very high in both groups, but was even higher in the patients with heart failure with preserved ejection fractions, amounting to 4 to 5 comorbidities per patient. And in fact, these comorbidities very often were the cause of both recurrent hospitalization and mortality. So I think this is a really important observation. Comorbidities were prevalent in the majority of patients with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, and so this may explain why therapeutic studies have not been successful in these patients. They've been directed at the heart and not the comorbidities. Now, the last study deals with chronic total occlusions, and again, it's a retrospective analysis of patients with non-emergent caths that yields the interesting data that 18% of the patients who had these caths had a chronic total occlusion, that the majority of them had neither a Q wave nor evidence of LV dysfunction, and that only about a third were subsequently subjected to an intervention. So still an important question in cardiology, what to do with chronic total occlusions. Data like this will point us toward getting the answers. For Inside JACC, I'm Tony DeMaria.